Hello out there in Webland, and welcome to another edition of Movies Are Boring. This is the only show on the internet where two defense journalists sit and talk about movies and pop culture. With you as always, I am your host, Matthew Galt, and my co-host, the man, the myth, the beard, Kevin Nodell. Say hello, Kevin.
Hello, Kevin.
All right, guys, today we're going to be talking about The Imitation Game, which is an Oscar contender this year, about the famed computer scientist Alan Turing. And we're going to do something that we don't normally do in Movies Are Boring. Normally, when I write about movies and when Kevin and I talk about them, we'll touch on historical inaccuracies a little bit, but we don't kind of out-and-out shit on the movie. Kevin and I both watched this movie. We both, I think it's awful, and more than awful, damaging to Turing's legacy. And so because of that, we're going to tell you a lot of the stuff that's wrong with the film, of which there's a lot. Kevin, you know a lot more about this than I do. Why don't you tell people who Alan Turing is, real quick?
Alan Turing was a mathematician and cryptographer who is, in the movie, is sort of correct about this, but overplays a lot of things. Is generally believed to be the person who broke the Enigma code, which was a very difficult code to break that the Nazis had come up with during World War II, and is credited as being the father of computer science. So kind of a big deal.
And the movie largely takes place during World War II with Alan Turing trying to crack the Enigma code. And there's some flashbacks to his childhood as well. And then there's a little bit after the war because he died, unfortunately, in 1954, Kevin?
Yes.
Okay. So let's get into it. I hated this movie a lot. And Kevin, you did too. I think we hated it for slightly different reasons.
I think I hated the movie a little less than you did. Not by a lot. I think, and we'll get into it a little bit. I think it takes unnecessary liberties with history.
Okay.
To make the story more Oscar baity and to make it more into A Beautiful Mind in World War II. And I didn't really care for that. I think. And in a lot of ways, and I think, okay, one thing that I forgot to mention in my summary of Alan Turing, and this is important and central to this film, is his obscenity charge. Alan Turing was gay. That's an important thing because he was charged in 1952 after the war. Because being gay was a crime at that point in the UK, and he was given the option of prison or undergoing chemical castration with estrogen injections. And this movie is very much kind of about making him into a gay martyr, but also doing it in the clumsiest, weirdest, most backward way I think I've ever seen.
Right, they turn him, and this is one of the big problems I had with the movie. They victimize him, right? They take away a lot of his agency, especially with that decision, because the way that they portray it in the film, his indecency charge and subsequent investigation is used as the framing device. And
weird. I just want to say, weird framing device. I forgot about that subplot several times, and when they cut back to it, like when they cut back to the present in the 1950s, I would get confused every once in a while and have to remind myself, oh, right, they've got this present-day subplot that I keep forgetting about.
But so in real life, when Alan Turing admitted to what had been, well, okay, backing up, his home was broken into in 1951, I believe. And there was a gentleman that he had been seeing off and on who was 19 years old, and the gentleman told some of his buddies about Turing, and one of those buddies broke into his home. and that's kind of where the indecency charge sprang from, because everything came out. And the thing was, Turing admitted to it. In the movie, he's depicted, and a big part of the subplot is him hiding himself, right? And making sure that people don't know that he's a homosexual, and being very much in the closet. When he was busted on this indecency charge, he thought that homosexuality was going to be legalized soon, and he admitted it up front what was going on. And he was the one that decided he was given the choice between the chemical castration and the jail time, and he opted for the chemical castration. That's correct?
It is. They do say that in the movie, but it depicts it as destroying his ability to. Now, I mean, to be sure, the chemical castration, like that is a terrible procedure. And it was not a pleasant thing for him to go through, and it's debated whether when he took the cyanide, he died by eating a cyanide poisoned apple, and it's debatable whether it was suicide or not. And a lot of people have attributed his therapy to being one of the major causes of his suicide, if it is in fact a suicide. I think there's a big case to be made for that. It did make him unhappy, but it's not as though it made him go crazy.
Right, which is what it feels like in the film, is that the estrogen's making him, is crippling him in some way.
Right? Like he just has a complete breakdown and complete dementia when you see him. He's just this miserable, quivering little creature. And I think that's another thing that bothers me about this movie, is in terms of the liberties they take with his personality. For one, his being gay wasn't as big of a secret at Bletchley Park as they made it out to be. In fact, there are some reports of him making passes at people, and the idea that he just can't, because they kind of put him somewhere on the autism scale, and there's no evidence really that he was ever anywhere on the autism scale.
Right. They make him much less personable than he was in real life. Right.
Right. And it's not as though, and certainly he was difficult to work with some, as geniuses like him often are. Like he was eccentric, but he wasn't despised at Bletchley Park. He was a person who had friends, who was respected in his field. Was like, I mean, people could be frustrated working with him, but they didn't hate him. And I think that's something I think that actually does a discredit to what happens at the end when he finally is put up on the obscenity charge. I think that's what makes it all the more unbelievable, is that he was this person who was respected. He was, I mean, granted, what he did at Bletchley was secret, but it's not as though people didn't know. And his coworkers knew, and they kind of gloss over the fact that a lot of his coworkers did testify on his behalf during the trial. Like Hugh, who is kind of his, I mean, they stopped being nemesises throughout
the... Hugh in the film is the tall, good-looking other genius that's working at Bletchley Park, and the movie kind of pits them against each other a little bit. There's kind of a friendly rivalry in the beginning. Yes.
Not friendly.
Well, yeah, okay, fair enough. An unfriendly rivalry at the beginning, which is largely false. Correct.
No, in fact, when they portray Turing as going over everybody's head and writing this letter to Churchill to put him in charge of breaking the code and getting 100,000 pounds to build the bomb, the machine. Hugh was actually one of the people who supported that, and I believe was one of the people who wrote the letter. 3 people wrote the letter. Turing was the one whose name was first, and I think that's another thing. Like they try to make him into this rogue, this person who just. I mean, when you first are introduced to him, it's like, oh, I don't want to work in a team. These men will just slow me down. And he though he struggled in some ways in a team, like in a team setting, like he needed other people to be with more people skills in the team. It's not as though he was opposed to working with the team, and it's not as though he was a poor leader.
Right. The bomb, the machine that they build that helps them break Enigma was very much a team effort. I think he worked in close collaboration with another scientist that's not even portrayed in the film. To
Right.
create it.
They also portray this enterprise as being like 6 people. Um, and that's just a complete falsehood. There were a lot of huts. Like it's all like this is all happening in Hut 8, and it's like 8 people. Like no, there were hundreds of people at Bletchley Park working on breaking these codes and working on cryptography. And I think that's actually one of the things that's most impressive about it. The scale of this operation, and that they managed to keep it secret, because this was not a little thing. This was important. Like this was super important to the war effort. And it's not as though they were being deprived of resources.
Yeah, it is weird because I kept feeling like watching the film because they cast the is it Dennison, I think, the guy that was played by.
We'll also talk about him a little bit and what they got really wrong with that.
There's an adversarial element to everyone that's above them, right? As if they don't want them to succeed somehow, or they don't believe in what they're doing. Which I thought, which felt very odd to me, because like, why set up this team and why put these people together if you're just going to crap on them the whole time?
The thing that's weird about that, because Dennison, and something that they get really wrong about that,
Dennison is basically the military leadership at Bletchley Park in the film. He's played by the guy that plays Tywin Lannister in Game of Thrones. Sorry, Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, and of course, great choice. Way to make him likable. But no, he's portrayed as not understanding what these men do and not understanding really their importance, when in reality he was a military cryptographer. So he knew exactly what it was that they do, knew exactly how important it was. And though maybe there may have been some clashes and some disagreements, it's not as though these people didn't understand why this was important and why they were doing it.
Right, and his family has actually expressed they're upset by the film, and I believe they've written some pieces somewhere. I'll find a link and I'll link it to the bottom about how they're very upset by his portrayal in the film. They feel that they marginalized his contribution to the entire project.
Well, not just marginalized, but they villainized somebody who wasn't villainous. It's inserting problems where there weren't problems, and maybe it worked artistically, but the problem is they used someone's real name and used a real person and made them do things that they didn't necessarily do. Like sometimes with historical movies, when people fudge facts like that, they create like an alternate character for some artistic reason, but they didn't do that. They just take people who are actual historical figures and kind of play with them like action figures.
Right. That's exactly what happened here.
To make everything work, and I think that's a problem when people watch this, because they were, and that's I think what bothers me about this movie, because they bragged about how much research they did when they made this movie, and it's just not very accurate.
Right, because it's all fitting into this specific myth that we have that's very popular in our culture, and I think that's like, I hate movies like this. These Oscar bait biopics. I'm thinking of things like A Beautiful Mind. Anything that's centered around one person's performance that's a biopic, I think tends to be awful, especially when it's the loner genius thing, like A Beautiful Mind. And this is a character that Cumberbatch plays constantly. You know, he played Sherlock, which I love. He's going to be playing Dr. Stephen Strange in the upcoming Marvel movies. He's played Van Gogh. He played Julian Assange. These people that are the smartest person in the room, that no one believes in, and goes rogue, and they're the rogue genius that has to that everyone kind of has to trail behind. I always, that myth always irritates me, because I think that these people historically have robust support structures. Maybe not Van Gogh, certainly, but genius is supported by the people that love them and their coworkers. And I think that's something that gets lost in stories like this, especially this one. Turing assuredly was very important and was a groundbreaking mind, but like you say, Kevin, he had hundreds of other people that were assisting him, and this movie kind of tosses all that aside so that we can believe this myth that we want to believe, that there are some people that are just born with these immense talents and immense brains that are misunderstood. That's another important element of this.
But I think what's worse about this is they make him into this showboating narcissist.
Mm-hmm.
Thinks he's better than everyone else, when in reality he wasn't. He knew very, very well that he was working with a team and had to rely on other people, and that he was building on other people's research. They do mention it a few times, the contribution of some of the Polish code breakers,
right.
that work they were building on, which is another important aspect of this. Like, none of this exists in a vacuum. It's not as though Alan Turing walked into this and figured it out and won the war. And Alan Turing wouldn't have told you that if he had lived to talk about what he did at Bletchley.
So why do you think? So this movie's up for a whole mess of Oscars, right? Including Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Director. Why? Because like watching it, I didn't think, like, as far as how it's put together, it's not any better or any worse than any other of these kinds of movies, right? I think Cumberbatch's performance is amazing because he's a wonderful actor, even if I didn't like the way the character was written. Why do we want to mythologize these kind of people like this, do you think?
I'm not. Well, I would say that I think Alan Turing does deserve. I think he deserves this, though from a better movie that tells it more accurately and portrays him more as he was. I think he, in many ways, is a martyr for gay rights, though he never really sought out to be.
Right.
I think it is the fact that this story did lay dormant for so long, and that he is this important person who is a war hero who was swept under the rug for so long just because he was gay. And now
the Queen didn't pardon him until 2013.
Correct. Which was after, that was something that came up, backtracking a little bit. I've been to Bletchley Park, to the museum that they have out there, so I've actually seen where this was. I went there in 2011. I had to think about that for a second. And when I went there, me and the students that I went with were the only people there. Like, this wasn't a busy museum. This wasn't a popular destination, and their staff was all volunteer. And some of the buildings there were kind of falling into disrepair, and they just didn't have the money to maintain the place. And they kind of talked very candidly with us about how they were hurting for money, how people just don't really know this story and how important it is. I mean, people know. And even they mentioned that I'm forgetting a member of it was a member of the royal family visited them recently and gave them some money and talked about how it was important, but like it was just really difficult to get people to pay attention to it and to get people interested in it. Partly because computers and programming and code breaking isn't conventionally exciting.
Right, it's hard to make a good story out of cyber stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
as we've seen with some recent movies that have come out. In, I mean, including this one in some ways, and maybe that's why they felt the need to manufacture conflict. But I think that there's enough conflict in this story with the enormity of what's going on and how important their work is. Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of other problems that we've even kind of glossed over, like the whole stuff with his childhood, which isn't necessarily that accurate. Like it's kind of accurate, but not really.
Right, in the film, he is shown when he's when he's young, is probably like what, 14, 12 to 14, somewhere in there, you'd say.
Yeah.
He's developing a friendship with another boy named Christopher, who's into cryptography, etc. And Christopher, pardon?
Which is real.
Which is real. And this childhood friend of his died of bovine tuberculosis, right? Quite suddenly, and that happens. In the film, the headmaster pulls Turing aside and says, "Hey, I know he was your only friend. He's dead. I'm sorry." And Turing kind of disavows all knowledge of the guy, right? Says, "I don't know who Christopher is. Christopher's not my friend," etc. Which is not what happened.
No.
Turing was great friends with him, was devastated by this loss, and kept up in contact with the family for years afterwards, including going on vacations with them, right?
Correct. And it's kind of being... And they do it in this movie to make it seem more tragic and make him more martyry.
Right, and to play into that, like, I have to hide my true feelings thing that is so much a part of the movie, which is patently false.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I think they try to make the story more tragic than it is, and they try to make him they try to make him more complicated than he was, but in a way, I think they make him more simplistic than he was. That's something that bothers me. I think that the real story is more nuanced than that and shows a society that's more nuanced than that. And I think I said it earlier in this discussion, but I'll just say it again. I think that's what makes his indecency trial all the more outrageous and all the more tragic. That this person who is so widely respected and admired and loved could have been put into such a position like that. And that the system would just not care.
Right, and that's the bigger story, and the more interesting story, and the more nuanced story, right? And to simplify it to the coppers kind of finding something out and being like, "Oh, we got a university professor," is very wrong feeling. Another thing that irritated me. This is like a conceit of the story, but it bothered me. The way the framing device is him talking to this detective, right, that's investigating him. And during the course of their discussion, he's telling the story of the Enigma in Bletchley Park, that's treason, right? He's revealing state secrets.
No, and they make Turing commit treason twice, actually, in this movie.
What was the other?
Huh?
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, the other is when he is blackmailed by a fellow cryptographer about who he finds out is a Soviet spy, and he tells him, if you tell them my secret, I'll tell them yours, which didn't happen, which is another problem, that he would keep information like that to himself in order to hide his little secret. Like that makes him a traitor.
Yeah, so he's a traitor twice over in the film, which is just making me more angry.
Because when in reality he was a traitor never.
Right, a great war hero, like you said.
Yeah.
Ugh.
And I don't know if, and they try to make him feel more. They portray him as being somebody who's ill at ease and not comfortable with himself. That's not who Turing was.
Right, he was very comfortable. Great, cracked jokes. Everyone thought he had a great, if odd, sense of humor. Unkempt, dirt under the fingernails, wearing the same clothes over and over. Normal genius
I
stuff.
mean, normal computer programmer stuff. I mean,
Yeah,
what?
normal computer programmer stuff. Yeah, no, absolutely. I've got a few friends that do that, and yeah, if you see them more than twice in a row, 2 days in a row, you'll be shocked at the way
I
they
think
are.
I think that's something that because they try to. It's the narrative of the outsider, the person who's different, and I think what the other story is like. He's really like, other than being gay, he's really not that outlandish. And is that outlandish? And I think that's what makes it so ridiculous.
Well, it was the thing that's outlandish about. Well, okay, we were talking about this before the cameras rolled, and this kind of feeds. This will segue nicely into something else that you wanted to talk about. There are things about our collective past that are terrible. Um, you know, there certainly, but there's a tendency to want to believe that the past was far worse than it was, especially in regards to things like um, how Alan Turing was treated, right? Because, like you said, his homosexuality was an open secret. It's something that didn't particularly bother a lot of people. And again, something that plays into that kind of cultural stereotype about the past is Keira Knightley's character, right?
Right, that whole thing, which was really uncomfortable to watch. Also, just because, and I think when I watched it, part of it that made it uncomfortable was knowing how inaccurate it is. Like it touches on something that was real. Um, because sexism in the 40s is certainly a real thing. But it just, and I think maybe you can just kind of explain the scene when we're introduced to that character.
Okay, so Keira Knightley, Turing's looking for more people to work with him at Bletchley Park, specifically linguists, correct? And so he puts a crossword puzzle in the newspaper that he says is very difficult. You can beat it under 10 minutes or less. You can come in and take another crossword puzzle. Beat that under 6 minutes or less, we'll have a job interview. So Keira Knightley shows up for the 6-minute crossword puzzle test. She's the only woman there, and they try to beg her off because she's a woman. They say, like, no, we're not, you're a lady, like, you should be a secretary, of secretarial works upstairs, etc., etc. Alan defends her. She's brought in. She does the crossword puzzle in 5 minutes, which not even Alan could do. And then she's recruited, even though it's very difficult for her because her parents are oppressive and they don't want her to work with a bunch of men, etc. And this is completely far off base, as you were telling me earlier, because her name was Joan Clark, I believe, right?
Yeah, the reality of the story is that entire backstory completely made up. She was in fact recruited for the program specifically by her former academic advisor, somebody who was already working on the program. So she was handpicked, and that whole backstory with her repressive parents who didn't want her working in the place with all the men, also untrue. And one of the things that comes up is Turing becomes engaged to her in order to get her parents off her back, basically.
They were actually engaged.
They were engaged, but they were engaged, and that is sort of accurately portrayed in that they were engaged because they liked each other, even though she basically kind of knew that he was gay. And that becomes a plot point later on. But when they break off their engagement, it didn't really happen the way that it was portrayed in the film.
Right,
It was really weird. Again, a really weird, uncomfortable scene.
Right, why was he was pushing everybody away, and so he breaks off the engagement with her and tells her, I'm gay. And she said, well, I've always suspected and I don't care. You and I are good friends. We'll just have an unconventional marriage. And then he forces a fight to hurt her, to push her away from him. That is kind of strange because the whole last half hour of the movie is him just lashing out at people to protect them, I guess, from being his. I don't know. It really got messy there towards the end. They're trying to shoehorn this myth that we have in our culture on top of a really fascinating and nuanced story, and it just didn't quite work.
Now, after shitting on the movie for the past, how long have we been talking?
About half an hour we've been shitting on this movie.
Okay. That said, I'm kind of glad that this happened.
That they made a movie? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it's not as though they haven't made movies before, but kind of one of the things we were talking about, and how I was talking about Bletchley Park and that museum, and how people didn't go, and how people were just unaware of that story. Having a movie starring Benedict Cumberbatch as Alan Turing, I think ultimately, for as much misunderstanding as I think this movie will foster, as with a lot of these historical movies, the fact that people are aware more so of Alan Turing than they used to be, I think is good.
Right, because I think that if you heard his name before, most people, especially like internet nerds like us, are going to think of the Turing test, which is the famous thought experiment that he came up with for testing artificial intelligence to see if it's close enough to being a real human. But you're right. I think if this movie does anything else, if this movie does nothing else, it's going to make people more aware of him and get them to read the good autobiographies that are out there, correct?
Hopefully. I mean, I hope so. I really do. Because I think people deserve to know the real story, and it's not as though nothing in this movie is accurate. And they do accurately portray basically how they did crack the code. They used the Germans' arrogance against themselves. By knowing that every message would at some point use the words Heil Hitler. They used the Germans' arrogance to crack the code, which is pretty awesome.
I do like that, yeah.
Though also another thing that's inaccurate. They say that he didn't speak German. Why would they be interested in having him break a German code? He in fact did speak German and traveled to Germany at one point before the war.
How many languages did he speak? Just German?
I don't know how many languages he spoke. I haven't studied this. I have a lot of friends who are more into Turing. Like when I did visit Bletchley Park, my England roommate was a computer science student and was really stoked to be at Bletchley Park. Like he was geeking. I mean, I appreciated it, but he was stoked to be there, where the computer was born. But yeah, I think, again, overall, I'm happy that people are paying attention to his story. Hopefully, people will educate themselves about the story of Bletchley Park, because I do think it's hugely important. I mean, for us especially, being people who write about national defense intelligence, and we do so on the internet.
Which would not exist if not for Alan Turing.
Everything we do, we owe to stuff that happened at Bletchley Park.
Yeah.
So I think it's super important. I think people need to know about it, and I think it's definitely worth a movie. I just wish it were a better one.
And with that, I think that we will leave you. Kevin, do you have anything else you'd like to add? I think that was a good note to go out on.
Yeah, I think it's good enough. Hold on. Still, fuck this.
You have a child's handwriting.
Thank you. Read a book about Bletchley Park. But I mean, if you must watch the movie, watch it. If you've already watched it, that's great. It's time to read a book, though. Is what I would recommend.
So put down the popcorn, guys. Go get a book.
Go to the library, or get on the internet.
Yeah, Wikipedia will take you. Will start your journey for you.
Right.
So this has been Movies Are Boring. With you as always, Matthew Galt, my co-host, the man, the myth, the beard, Kevin Odell. Say goodnight, Kevin.
Good night, Kevin.